Hi, welcome to Courageous Journeys. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thanks for joining me. Like many of the videos that I do, this video today came from a recent conversation because as I have these conversations with people, I end up talking about how common it is or how impactful it is. And I think, oh, I should do a video about that. So today I want to talk to you about something that is probably pretty familiar to many, if not most of you. So catastrophizing. Maybe you've heard of that or maybe you haven't, but catastrophizing is a pattern of thinking. You've heard me talk before about automatic thoughts, and the automatic thoughts that we have tend to fall into one of about 8 different patterns of thinking. And one that I've talked about is personalizing or taking things personally. Another one that I talk about quite a bit is kind of all or nothing, like you're either good or you're bad. You're either totally responsible or not responsible at all, so therefore you're fully responsible. And even should is another pattern of thinking. And I'm a huge shoulder, or at least I was, but I still do it every once in a while. So catastrophizing is another one. And catastrophizing really comes or is an extreme version of worry. Now, how many of you worry? Worry is something that most of us probably do, and some of us, many of us probably, worry incessantly. Like there isn't a day that goes by that you don't worry. And I have been a huge worrier. I would worry about pretty much everything. Even if it had nothing to do with me, I would worry about it. And it really takes such a significant toll on how we feel, the energy that we have to put towards anything, even the hope that we might have for different things to come to life for us. So I want to talk about some different aspects of worry and catastrophizing, so that first you'll recognize maybe that you do this, and if so, don't beat yourself up about it. Just have an awareness that you do it so that when you do it, you'll be more likely to be able to stop it, to readjust how you're thinking about something. So as you think about catastrophizing, it really is, sorry, there's a little bug flying around my face. Catastrophizing is really looking at things playing out in worst case scenario. So it could be something relatively minor, like being late to work and thinking you're going to lose your job and end up homeless. And ending up homeless is not minor, but being late to work on occasion is probably fairly minor. Or it could be something really significant that you end up jumping to worst case scenario. And this was a huge thing for me. And to be really honest with you, I still catastrophize. My mind can immediately jump to worst case scenario automatically because it's such an ingrained pattern and it's based in fear. And most of my catastrophizing happens in the worry, the fear that I have of something happening to people that I love. So immediately my mind can take me there. What is different now, though, is that I don't end up living in the moment as if that worst case scenario has actually happened. So again, we can look at being late to work and end up finding our thoughts taking us down this road to ultimately being homeless. Like you might think, oh, my boss is going to be mad at me. If my boss is mad at me, I'm going to get fired. are written up. If I get written up, I'm going to end up being fired. If I end up getting fired, I'm going to end up homeless. I'll lose my car. I'll lose my home. I'll lose the people I love. What are they going to think about me, right? All those things can come to mind. And on that drive to work, when you're thinking you're going to be late, whether it's 5 minutes or 50 minutes, when your mind goes there, you actually start preparing for that to happen, right? You start planning things out in your mind, like how can you stop that from happening, or what's going to happen if you end up homeless? Which street will you camp out on? Is there anybody that you could go to? Like, you start preparing for all these worst case scenario situations. And not only that, which is stressful enough, but because your mind is going there, our feelings follow. Our feelings respond to what's happening in our mind. So that initial worry, that stress of I'm going to be late, might be there, and that can create some sensation in your body. And in all likelihood, that sensation in your body immediately is what's in part fueling some of those thoughts. But when you start getting to the point where you think, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job, internally, you're feeling as if you're already homeless. Internally, you are feeling the level of stress and uncertainty and hopelessness as if you have actually already lost your job and have nowhere to go. Think about that for a moment. Think about times in your life, maybe it's something really recent, something, again, relatively minor, like being late to work, or maybe it's something really significant where somebody that you love gets sick or is waiting on a diagnosis. And sometimes the outcome really can be worst case scenario. But before you ever know what the outcome is, you're already living as if that is your reality. So think about that. Take a moment, maybe even pause this video right now, and think about how many times you've done that in your life. I spent far too long doing that in my life. And like I said, I still can do that. My mind can immediately jump to worst case scenario. And I'll give you an example of, this was years ago, it's probably been 15 years or so ago at this point. So I had done a lot of healing. I already had my private practice. But catastrophizing is something that I continue to do. And I had traveled back to basically my hometown, which was 2.5 hours away for like a weekend or something to see some friends. And my husband stayed home. So generally on my way back, and this was a trip I made fairly frequently, but generally on my way home, I'd call him, let him know I was on my way home, and just so that he'd be aware. And I don't remember at what point. I don't know if it was the first call or I don't know if it was a call later on, but it was pretty early on in my drive home. And I tried to call him for whatever reason, and he didn't answer. So initially it was like, oh, he's probably in the bathroom or taking the dog for a walk or something. No, nothing significant going through my mind. Just, oh, okay, I'll try again. So I don't know how much time went by, maybe 15 minutes or so, and I tried again, and he didn't answer again. And then it was like, I wonder what's going on here. And way long ago, my mind could have jumped to other kinds of bad things, like, why isn't he home? What's he doing? Is he doing something he shouldn't be doing? And I laugh about that now, but when you're in that place, it is not funny. It feels horrible. And I was a very insecure person for a very long time. And there was certainly a time that my mind would have gone there. However, at this point that I'm referring to now, the example that I'm giving, my mind didn't go there, but it was just kind of like, well, what's going on? He's certainly not still in the bathroom at this point. Like, did he go somewhere? Whatever. And then I tried again. And by the third time he didn't answer, I started to worry. And like at that point, I think it went to catastrophizing. So not just, oh, I hope he's feeling okay. It was, oh my God, I hope nothing's happened. But again, because I had done some healing, I was able to say, okay, that's ridiculous. Don't jump to this conclusion. I'm sure he's fine. I left messages for him as well to call me back. He didn't obviously call me back. So a little bit more time went by and I called again and he still didn't answer. So by this time, I'm really starting to worry. And my mind is going to, oh my God, what if something's happened to him? I'm replaying the last conversation I had with him, trying to remember, did I talk to him earlier today? Did I talk to him last night? When did I talk to him last? Trying to talk myself through it, to not panic too much, because what could I do? I was still maybe at least an hour and a half away at that point. Try again. Or he doesn't call me back. I don't remember if I kept trying literally every time, but he still hadn't called me back. And I think I did actually keep trying him. And there came a point when I began to not only worry about that worst case scenario, like something happened and he died, but I was envisioning at that point. I'm a pretty visual person, and so my thoughts are often in pictures. And by that point, I was literally envisioning walking in the home and finding him laying there for however many hours it had been since I last talked to him. And this may seem extreme, but I know some of you are going to be able to relate to this. But that is catastrophizing. In all reality, it had probably been maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours since I talked to him, or at least communicated with him in some way. But because he wasn't answering, each time he didn't answer, every moment or minute that went by and he didn't call me back, it was further evidence in my catastrophizing mind that it was more likely that something had happened. And literally by the time I'm envisioning walking into the house and finding him dead, I was living, I was feeling the emotion of that. I believe, if I remember correctly, like I actually became pretty emotional thinking about that, imagining walking in the house and finding him that way. And I'm sharing this with you because this is a fairly extreme example, but for me, that's where my catastrophizing mind goes to, and where my mind can still go to. Even now, if I can't get a hold of one of my kids for a while, or I can't get a hold of my husband, or like with COVID, not feeling well and thinking, oh my God, he had asthma as a kid. What if he gets COVID and dies? Like horrible, horrible thoughts. But again, the difference now is while my mind will go there, it can jump there very quickly, I'm able to rein it in. I'm able to say, okay, hold on a second here, and not feel in my body as if that worst case scenario is happening. So I'm able to not respond to the thoughts, to the fears, to the visual images that I see. I'm able to stop it and say, okay, the likelihood of that happening is very small. And this is an important part too, that we'll deal with it as it comes. And I can say, I'm afraid of that happening without it literally creating in my being a sense that I'm having to live through it currently. And even thinking about the idea, the example of being late to work. When we are fearing those things because of our automatic physiological response to fear, we end up feeling all of that as if it is happening. And then what can often happen, because we're still in that fear response, and you're distracted, you're stressed, maybe you get in an accident because you're not paying close attention. Maybe you miss your turn and end up being actually late for work. Because when we're in that fear response, it's literally about survival. It's the survival mechanism kicking in. So being aware that you're catastrophizing, being aware that you're in that state of worry is really important, because then you can talk yourself through it. And the other thing that I want you to keep in mind with all of this, and this is very common for childhood trauma survivors, it's common generally as well, but particularly for trauma survivors. The reality is that worry, and again, catastrophizing is an extreme form of worry, but worrying is really our mind's way of trying to prepare for an outcome. So think about that for a moment. Worry is our mind's way of trying to feel like we're prepared for a potential outcome. Right? Because worry is about negative outcomes. If we're thinking about positive outcomes, we don't feel worried, right? So worry is about negative outcomes, and we go there, our mind goes there as a way to try to help us feel prepared for the outcome. Of course, it doesn't work, but that's the mechanism that's happening there. And in a sense, it's also to try to control the outcome, to control your response to it, how you feel about it, what you do if it happens. So like when you're trying to plan things out, when you're trying to prepare for things, that can be a form of control, but not in the kind of control where you're trying to control other people specifically, like a really unhealthy type of almost abusive kind of behavior. Control in this sense is about trying to control things or people around you so that you can be prepared for the outcome. But that's ultimately what worry is. So when you're aware that your mind takes you there, and you can notice that you're worried, and you can say to yourself, or that you're catastrophizing, you can then say to yourself, okay, what am I afraid of right now? I'm afraid that this is going to happen. Okay, is that really likely to happen? Is it possible there could be other outcomes, right? Because realistically, in your adult life, how many times has that worst case scenario actually come to fruition? Now, I'm not saying that it never has, because unfortunately, maybe it has, like a diagnosis, or you lose your job. Hopefully you don't end up homeless, but maybe you lose your job. So certainly worst case scenario can happen. But in all reality, when you think about how many times you've worried about something happening or catastrophizing something that could happen, in all reality, how many times has it actually been worst case scenario? How many times has the actual outcome been your worst case scenario? Again, in your adult life, probably not very often. So reminding yourself of that is an important practice in reducing how much you catastrophize, and certainly the impact that it has on your being when you catastrophize. Because I was able to recognize how many times I had worried about somebody that I loved dying, and how many times it actually happened, which was actually quite small. And I'm saying that even given that I didn't my paternal grandfather died before I was born. My mother died when she was 49 years old and I was 23. My dad died at 53 when I was 24 years old. So I had experienced loss, and I already had children at that point that were young. So I had experienced loss. So I did have some pretty significant loss in my life, and both losses were very unexpected. But in reality, what I mostly worried about was my husband and my children. And when I really thought about how often I worried about that, it never actually happened. So even on that car ride, those first few times that I thought about the worst case scenario, I was able to remind myself, okay, it's very unlikely. These other possibilities are much more likely. Like he went to the bathroom, his phone was off, took the dog for a walk, whatever. Like those are much more likely to be the real story. The likelihood of walking in and finding him dead is pretty unlikely. So in that recognition that you're doing it, you can talk yourself through it. You can do some reality testing around how many times has that worst case scenario in your adult life, when you've worried about that worst case scenario, how many times has that actually happened? So it doesn't mean that bad things haven't happened, but the bad things that you've catastrophized about. So I want that to be very specific. Because like if you think of living through a natural disaster or something like that, but when you think about all the things that you catastrophize about, all the things that you worry about, how often, what is the percentage of times that those things actually come true? And my guess is pretty small. That number is going to be pretty small. So really pay attention to that. Notice when your mind goes to those places. Notice what you tend to catastrophize about, because that is a signal to you about some of your biggest fears. Like for somebody who worries about getting fired a lot, whether it's being late or some other reason, maybe one of your really big fears is ending up destitute, not having money to pay the bills, to pay your rent or mortgage, that you're going to end up homeless and alone. Like that might be one of your fears. And it comes up a lot with work because that is your primary source of income, I'm assuming. So you focus on that a lot. You focus on losing your job a lot because ultimately the fear is about being alone and not having anything. And maybe what that even means about you in terms of your core belief. So the focus is on losing the job. So maybe you stress yourself out a lot at work. Maybe you put in way too many hours and feel really burnt out because you're so afraid of losing your job. So having this awareness, this recognition can help you see kind of the whole picture there, and then do some things to help step back a little bit so that you're not overworking, burning yourself out, getting too stressed out. You can do things to help with that fear of ending up homeless instead of continuing to stress yourself out about being late to work or getting a bad review or doing something wrong or whatever it might be. We do this a lot in relationships as well. Money, relationships, and basically abandonment. Whether that's somebody dying, somebody leaving, somebody rejecting you, that comes up. Those are some of the ways that it comes up a lot. So I'd love to hear from you. Do you catastrophize? Can you relate to this? Share in the comments. Share some of the examples maybe even, because I know that there are certain things that we tend to go to. And knowing that we're not alone in that can be really helpful. So share your thoughts, comments below. I will look forward to connecting with you there. If you have a question related to trauma healing or mental health in general, please send it to qanda@courageousjourneys.com. I'll share that link below as well in the description. If you found this video helpful, if you know somebody who catastrophizes, maybe consider sharing this with them. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't yet subscribed, make sure you do so and click the little bell for notifications. I will look forward to seeing you again very soon.